Abraham Lincoln. The name itself just conjures up this image of a towering figure, right? A man with this quiet strength who somehow managed to steer a nation through its absolute darkest hour. But behind that legend is a story of rising up from nothing that is almost too incredible to believe.
Okay, let's just dive in. We all know this face. I mean, it's carved into giant memorials, it's on our money. This is the Lincoln of the Civil War, that somber, bearded 16th president, looking like he's carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. And, well, he kinda was. But see, this image, this is the end of the journey. The real question, the one that's just so fascinating, is how in the world did we get here? How did a guy from the absolute fringes of American society climb to the highest office in the land and completely redefine the nation itself? That's the story we're going to unpack. So let's start at the very beginning. And I mean the very beginning, which was a world away from the fancy marble halls of Washington, D.C. The sheer unlikelihood of Lincoln's story starts right here. He was born in 1809 into serious poverty in a one-room log cabin. And formal education? Forget about it. He had less than a year of it, total. Everything he learned, he basically taught himself, just devouring any book he could possibly get his hands on. Honestly, this incredible hunger for knowledge was pretty much his only ticket out of a life of backbreaking labor on the frontier. And he wasn't just a bookworm, not by a long shot. On the frontier, you had to be tough, and Lincoln was known for his physical strength. There's this great story about him taking on the leader of a notorious local gang in a wrestling match, and winning. It just perfectly shows who he was, this amazing mix of a super sharp mind and that rugged frontier grit. So, that same ambition and toughness eventually led him out of the wilderness and into the world of law and politics. He slowly worked his way up, from the Illinois state legislature to a single, pretty unremarkable term in Congress. And by the late 1840s, it really looked like his national political career might be over. But a storm was gathering over the country, one that would pull him right back to the center of the American state. And that storm had a name: slavery. It was the one issue the nation just couldn't ignore anymore. And it was the issue that would come to define Abraham Lincoln's entire life. So, what really lit the fuse was this piece of legislation right here, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. It basically tore up decades of fragile political compromises that had kept the country from falling apart. It threatened to let slavery expand into the West, and for Lincoln, who believed slavery was just plain wrong and had to be contained, this was a call to action. It completely reignited his political career, and he shot up as a leading voice in the new anti-slavery Republican Party.
And this is where he delivers one of the most famous lines in American history. In 1858, he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He was making it crystal clear. He wasn't necessarily calling for war, but he was stating a fact. This country couldn't keep going on its broken path. It had to become all one thing or all the other. Now, his growing fame was built on this clear moral stand, but also on his amazing backstory. This political cartoon from the 1860 election calls him the rail candidate, a nod to his log-splitting youth. His supporters love this image of a self-made man of the people, but you can see how his critics used it against him, showing his anti-slavery platform as a rail being held up by an enslaved person. But despite all the controversy, in 1860, the impossible happened. Abraham Lincoln, the rail candidate, was elected the first ever Republican president. And get this, he won without his name even appearing on the ballot in 10 southern states. The result? It was immediate and it was catastrophic. The nation began to break apart. Lincoln was now facing a challenge no president had ever even dreamed of, leading a nation that was literally at war with itself. And this image, wow, it just says it all, doesn't it? This is his first inauguration in 1861. Look up above him. The U.S. Capitol dome is still under construction. It's this powerful, almost haunting symbol of the broken country that he was now supposed to somehow put back together. As commander-in-chief, Lincoln was incredibly hands-on. He wasn't a military guy, but he read everything he could on strategy, and he watched the war effort like a hawk. He famously got so frustrated with his overly cautious generals, constantly pushing them to be more aggressive, to actually go after the Confederate armies and win the war. Then, in 1863, he made his boldest move, the Emancipation Proclamation. It was an absolute masterstroke. Now, it didn't free all the slaves right away, just those in the states that were still in rebellion, but what it did was fundamentally change the entire meaning of the war. It wasn't just about saving the old Union anymore.
It was now a fight to create a new union, one without slavery. And for Lincoln, this wasn't some cold political calculation. He felt the immense moral weight of this decision. Speaking about signing the proclamation, he said, "I never in my life felt more certain that I was doing right."
As the war dragged on, Lincoln's greatest weapon actually became his words. He used them to give meaning to all the terrible sacrifice and to redefine the very purpose of America itself.
And there is no better example of that than his most famous speech. He delivered it in just over 2 minutes at the dedication of the military cemetery at Gettysburg. It has since become one of the most sacred texts of American democracy. With these closing words, Lincoln brilliantly connected the brutal sacrifice of the war directly to the founding ideas of the country. He argued that these soldiers didn't just die to put the old Union back together, but to give the nation a new birth of freedom, to prove that a government based on human equality could actually survive.
After 4 long, brutal years of war, Lincoln had succeeded in his great task, but he would never get to see the nation he saved fully heal.
On April 14, 1865, just 5 days after the main Confederate Army surrendered, Lincoln was assassinated. The man who fought so hard to bind up the nation's wounds was struck down at the very moment of his greatest triumph. His death made him a martyr, but his achievements are just monumental. He saved the United States as one single nation. He was the driving force behind the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery for good. And through everything he did and said, he challenged America to finally live up to its founding promise, that all men are created equal. And that's why today, he's immortalized in stone, a permanent fixture in the American pantheon. In fact, historians consistently rank him as the nation's greatest president.
So, from a log cabin to Mount Rushmore, we started by asking how a man from the frontier could lead a nation through its darkest hour. But maybe the real answer is that only a man forged by the frontier, self-reliant, determined, and with this deep, profound sense of justice could have done it. He really was the man who saved the nation by giving it a new meaning.